The second step in understanding object-oriented PHP is understanding objects, or specific implementations of our classes. So let's learn objects or instances through an example of band, as in group of musicians. So when we create a band class or a band blueprint or template, we know that a band is going to have a name. Band will have members, and a band will have the ability to add a member, as well as the ability to perform. So to get started, how do we create a specific instance of band? Well, let's use the Beatles. We're going to set the Beatles variable to a new specific instance of our band. Next, we're going to simply var dump the Beatles. And I have my terminal set up so that we can run this pretty easily. And you'll notice we var dumped the Beatles variable, which is a specific instance or an object of the band class. And when we var dump it, you can see that, okay, we have an object which is created from our band class or blueprint. Exactly what we want. But we don't see the name or members or the ability to add a member or the perform function or behavior. So let's start off by creating a name property and a members property. And let's just re-dump that. Let's see what it does now. Okay, so now we do see the name and the members on our Beatles object. Why is this? Well, the properties is also known as the internal state or the data of an object. The functions are known as behavior. They don't hold state or internal data of an object. They can get it, they can return it, they can manipulate it, but they are not internal state. They are not the object state itself. So when we var dump it with the public name and the public members, we can see name and members now because that is the state, that is the data, that is the properties our object has. We don't show the behavior when we dump the variable. Behavior is what it can do. So next, let's do something like this. How would we want to create objects using our class blueprints in a business, very readable way? Well, what if we did something like equals new band Beatles, and we passed in an array of members, and we'll just say Ringo Starr or John McCartney or John Lennon, imagine. What if we just set it up this way? And so now we could create multiple bands, and when we new up our band, when we create a new instance or object from our band class or blueprint, it's much more readable. The Beatles with these members. So, and right now let's just get rid of, it's actually George McCartney, by the way, George McCartney. But we'll just do Beatles equals new band, then the title or the name of Beatles, and then Ringo Starr and John Lennon are the members. Well, right now, we're calling a method when we instantiate a new object from the band class. But how do we say, okay, when we create a new object from our band class and we pass a method or we call a method on construction of that band class, how do we call it? Well, in PHP, we have this special magic function called construct. Now, magic functions are denoted by this double underscore. Here's a list of all of our magic functions. One of those magic functions is this construct magic function. Now, this construct magic function is executed on construction of our object. When we new up or create or construct a new object from that class, the construction or construct method is executed. So right here, let's pass through name and members. And we know, because that's the special constructor method, that when we create a new band and we pass these parameters, what we're calling is this. So let's do this. We'll say when our new object or Beatles object is created, or any band object is created from our band class, we want to set the name of that object, this name referencing the Beatles, to the name we pass into our construct. And we want to reference this members, again referencing the Beatles in our case, to the members we pass in. So the Beatles name will be the Beatles, and the Beatle members will be this array of Ringo Starr and John Lennon. So let's see if that worked. Let's rerun our example.php, and you'll see that the name is now the Beatles, and the members for that object, the Beatles object from our band class, is an array of strings or musician names, Ringo Starr and John Lennon. So this properly worked. Now, we also have this public function add. What does this add function do? Well, it looks like it adds a member. So let's do this. This members equals members. And all this is saying is, okay, we want to take whatever is in our current members array, and we know it's an array because we passed in an array of users or musicians right here, and we want to push this member to that members array. So now we can do this. We can do Beatles add, and then we can do George McCartney, just like that. And now if we rerun our example.php, we have Ringo Starr, John Lennon, and George McCartney. Pretty cool stuff. Next, what if we don't want the users, or the developer more specifically, to be able to say, okay, Beatles members equals, I don't know, guitar playing Jimmy, right? We don't want them to do that, because if they do that there, well, now the array of members on our Beatles object is just guitar playing Jimmy. Even if they just wanted to add the members, we don't want them to be able to directly set the members. We want them to be able to access the members, but we don't want them to directly set and remove all of the other members. So let's do two things. First, in our members function, let's just return this members. That way we can still access the members. Next, let's change public members to protected members. And while we're at it, let's also change public name to protected name. Okay, and then we'll also do return this name. So now we can set the name, we can set the members, we can add the members, and we can get the members, but we cannot overwrite the members. See how this is now red? That's because we changed members from public to protected. So now to add a member, we can only do the add, and we can do Beatles members, the function to get the members for the Beatles. And so let's remove this right here, and let's rerun that to confirm that worked. Unexpected end of file. Let's see. And we have Ringo Starr, John Lennon, and George McCartney, and we are no longer able to directly override the Beatles members. Okay. So that is the constructor, and that is also an example of why we would want to use protected instead of public. Next, we're going to talk about static functions. And to use static function, I'm going to just refactor George McCartney to right here. To use static functions, we have to first understand what are static functions and what are static properties on a class, and how do we create them. Well, first, to create them, what we can do is we can either do public static property, we could say something like total, or we can do public static function, and we're going to use a create function. Now, what is the difference between static and instance properties or functions? Well, we know to access an instance function like add, we have to new up a new instance first. We have to have an object of that class to access the add member. We have to new up an instance. Well, static's a little different. Static, on the other hand, we can actually comment this out completely, and we can access static without creating a new instance. So we can just do band create, and then we could do the Beatles, and then we could do Ringo Starr, John Lennon, and George McCartney, right? Just like that. Now check this out. In this create, all we're going to do right now is we're going to var dump the name and the members. We're just going to var dump it. So we're not getting an object back because we're calling this statically. And so if we run this, we get a string of Beatles and the array of Ringo Starr, John Lennon, and George McCartney. This looks a lot like our object, but it is not. It is the individual string we passed in to the create method and the individual array. It is not a band object. So let's go back here and let's set up a really cool way to create instances or objects of our band class using the static create. So the first thing we want to do is we want to use the special ... notation of parameters. Now what this is doing is saying, okay, no matter how many parameters we pass into our static create function, we want to make it an array. No matter how many parameters we pass in, we want to make it an array, right? So if we go back here and we do example.php, same thing. It's an array. The first element is the string of Beatles. The second element is an array of members. Let's remove that. Next, we'll say, okay, there are 3 total members right now. So if we go back here, just to give you guys a better idea, we now are outputting all of the parameters, all 3 of the parameters instead of just 2 as an array. So that's all the ... does, is it takes the first parameter, the second parameter, the third parameter, and however many other parameters you want to add, and it turns them into an array. And we are just var dumping that there. Next, we are going to return a new static, and we're going to use the ... parameters again. Now, what is this doing? Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this for a couple of reasons. So the first ... turns the parameters like name and members into an array. The new static is saying, okay, based on the static function we are calling, we want to get a new instance. Even though we are in a static method, we want to get a new instance of whatever we called statically. This is honestly a little counterintuitive to what static is usually used for. But the reason you would do this is so you don't have to use new everywhere. Instead of doing new band and then passing in the Beatles, Ringo Starr, John Lennon, George McCartney, all that stuff, you can use band create, or you could use band make and make it more readable and follow along with the business jargon that you are using. And so when we say new static inside of a static function, we're saying, okay, based on the static function, give us a new instance from the same class where the static function was defined. So we're actually creating a new non-static object. We're creating an object from a static function. Statics are not usually used for objects. They're more of a namespace global function kind of thing. And then all we're saying is, okay, that array of that ... we use to make an array of parameters, well, let's turn that array back into parameters. And the reason we're doing the ... here and the ... here is so that whenever we change our constructor, whenever we add like total members count, we wouldn't also have to do name members total members count or anything like that. By using this ... notation, we're able to just say, okay, whenever we update our constructor, our static create, our pretty way of creating objects, will just automatically be able to accept whatever the constructor of this class accepts. So to bring this round circle, we're going to just simply say, okay, we're creating a new instance called Beatles, just like we did below. And now we're going to do var dump the Beatles. And if we open up our terminal again and run that, we again get an object, an instance of our band class with the name of Beatles, which is also protected now, and with an array of members of Ringo Starr, John Lennon, and George McCartney. So that is how we can use static methods. And static properties are a lot of the same way. To access a static property like this, we do public static total, and we could just do band total equals 500. Notice that we can just access it using this : or static notation to access the property. We don't have to new up an instance and then set total on the object itself. So then if we run it, you'll see like it's all the same. It still all works, and it's all working fine. So yeah, guys, that's static properties, and that is static functions, and a cool little workaround to use more declarative language instead of newing up a specific instance. The next thing I want to really go over is, we know that Ringo Starr, John Lennon, George McCartney, like, they're musicians, right? So why don't we just create here, let's get rid of that, a musician class. Maybe we're not adding much to it right now, but we do know that musicians play an instrument, you know, they have their own information and their own stuff. So we're going to create a musician class, and then we're going to say, okay, the musician constructor, the construct when we create a musician, right now it's just going to be a name. We're going to say this name is going to be set to the name we pass in the constructor. Then we're going to copy this musician class right here, and inside our musician class, or inside our members array, we're just going to make everything a musician. So that way in the future, if a musician can have an instrument, for example, we could just go here, add an instrument here, and then we could just do this instrument, etc., and also update that new musician down here. And so we can define, okay, what instrument are all of our musicians playing? How many years of experience do they have, etc., and we also need to var dump that. And so just taking that into account, we can see, okay, we'll probably end up expanding our musicians. So notice now our band, our Beatles variable, it has a name of Beatles. The members are an array of musician objects themselves. So now we have an array of members, and each member is a musician object, which is created from our musician blueprint. And so that's kind of a way to really look at it and say, okay, hey, where are we going to need to add functionality or blueprints for not only our bands, but also for the musicians in the bands, for maybe the instruments each of those musicians play. And you can see how you start to build out a project and really look at it intuitively and with a way of being able to expand your code in a clean, reusable, understandable way. So guys, other than that, I think that is a pretty solid overview of how to create objects and instances or specific implementations from a band class. And then also how to look at it and make a musician class, how to use the constructor, and how to use static functions versus instance functions, or instance properties versus static properties. The biggest takeaway from instances and objects is that they are specific implementations of a class. So if we wanted to create another class or another object from our band class and call them foo fa fo, and we did band create, and we did foo fa fo singing Sally, drumming Timmy, and I don't know, trombone Johnny, whatever. And then we wanted to do var dump foo fa fo. Well, now we get the string of foo fa fo, and the members are Singing Sally, Drumming Timmy, Trombone Johnny. And then of course we could go down here and get our musicians, and we can make all these musicians as well. And so if we do that one more time, now we have the band of foo fa fo, and their members are also musicians with Singing Sally, Drumming Timmy, Trombone Johnny. And at the same time, we could dump both the Beatles and foo fa fo, and voila, we have two bands or two objects created from the same band class. So guys, that is objects and instances in a nutshell in reference to object-oriented PHP. In the next tutorial, we are going to go over probably inheritance, but maybe interfaces, maybe abstract classes, but I'm thinking inheritance. And yeah, thanks for tagging along, guys. If this was helpful or useful, like and subscribe, and I will keep them coming. Simple.